The F1 Pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula One?
Yeah, we go to town on it.
You are very welcome along to the F1 Pod here on Off the Ball. It's episode 17. Shane Hannon here with you for the next little while, and I'm not coming to you from my bedroom or an attic. It's the studio this week. We've moved up in the world, big time. It's episode 17, as we said. You'll get the F1 Pod live on Wednesdays after race weekends in the F1 Pod podcast feed and the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed as well, wherever you get your podcasts for free. And the F1 Pod and Off the Ball is brought to you by Chicago Town Pizza. Real takeout taste for less with Chicago Town. We're looking back on the Brazilian Grand Prix at Interlagos and of course ahead to the Las Vegas Grand Prix as well. Delighted to welcome for this episode Bernie Collins, familiar face to all the F1 Pod fans, former head of race strategy for the Aston Martin Formula One team, and a big welcome as well to Blake Hinsey, former F1 performance engineer who has worked with Red Bull Racing and also co-host of the Engine Braking podcast. Bernie and Blake, how are things?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Keeping well. Blake, welcome.
Good to be here, man. I'm a little bit tired after the triple header, but I'm sure everybody else is as well.
Oh, big time. The only thing was, I think Bernie, you made this point as well, that the 10 o'clock, I think was it 10 o'clock Irish time to start for the race. So I mean, it works out nicely in some ways for us. We can still have our Sundays.
Exactly.
Yeah. For those of us not doing all the analysis like Blake does, it's perfect because I can sit down, my Sunday's done, fire's on, relax and watch the F1. So yeah, I think the afternoon time, which I hate saying out to others because I know that in many parts of the world the F1's always at a terrible time. So
yeah, all the Kiwis are out there very angry with you. But you were busy during the race. I saw your Twitter feed had lots of really interesting insight, and I didn't realize you were tweeting your thoughts throughout the race, because otherwise I would have had that up on my side screen as well to keep me a little bit better in the loop on the interesting strategic aspects of the race.
Yeah, 100%. It's a minefield out there when you're trying to live tweet a race and there's so much happening across the grid at different points in time. It's almost impossible. But Blake, you might tell us a little bit of your own background. For people unfamiliar, I mean, a lot of F1 fans will be familiar with your work. But maybe talk to us about your background and what you've done and your work with Red Bull and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so just like my accent's all destroyed after being in the UK for 12 years, but I'm from Dallas, Texas. I moved to the UK when I was 25 to get a motorsport master's degree. At some series of events, I decided I wanted to be a Formula One engineer. So I head down that path single-mindedly, and somehow I landed a job at Force India at the time after my master's degree. Bernie worked for that team a couple of years after I left it, or probably we swapped years after. When I went to Red Bull, you were in as strategy at Force India, weren't you? I think we might have lost Bernie, but anyway,
she didn't want to answer that one.
Yeah. So yeah, I was spent a couple of years at Force India as a trackside performance engineer to DiResta and Perez, and then later I took a job opportunity, came up to be performance engineer at Red Bull Racing for Sebastian Vettel. So I was like, I'd love to apply for that job and take that job. And sure enough, I got offered the job, and then Sebastian left to go to Ferrari, and then I worked at Red Bull as a trackside performance engineer on Daniil Kvyat's car and then Max Verstappen's car through the start of 2018. And then I kind of wanted to shift gears and focus not on trackside operations, but more on longer term development. So I spent my final 4 years through 2021 with Red Bull as a senior simulator performance engineer, focusing on tools, methods, analysis, visualization, and getting more use out of simulation tools, track data, and simulator data to make the car go faster on a weekly basis, monthly basis, and then, developing future projects. So that's kind of it. And now I'm a analytical content creator focusing on Formula One analysis and getting opportunities to hang out and chat with people like you about the beautiful, nuanced, interesting technical world of Formula One.
What's your main target audience, Blake? I guess, and the thing about both yourself and Bernie's work, it's amazing in that you make the most complicated numbers and tire degradation and all these complicated things seem much easier to understand and comprehend for the F1, for the normal F1 fan, I guess. Yeah. Is that the ambition, I guess?
Absolutely. I think that's the thing Bernie does extremely well, and I'm learning as well. As like us engineers, we're only used to talking to people who are, often very high level about technical topics. So the shorthand and the nuance that we leave out of these discussions. But when you go to my goal is to bring new people on board. So you could be a novice. You could have started watching Formula One last year. And I'm like, come into this conversation with us. If you know, if your entry point is here on the basics, good. Let's answer the basic questions. There are no stupid questions, because the more that we get the Formula One fan base interested in the technical topics, the conversations that we can have with the wider audience in the longer term become much more interesting and technical, and help to highlight how technical and fascinating the sport really is. It is a sport, yes, but it's also lots of engineering, which is stuff that myself, Bernie, and all the other engineers are passionate about. And hopefully we're finding the fans are becoming a lot more interested in this as well.
It's an interesting one as well, Bernie, isn't it? Because like I mentioned, Blake has done work with Red Bull, and yourself even with Aston Martin as well, and other teams. Is there competition on the grid between engineers and that? Because I guess you probably have friends on other teams, but there's also the danger of too much information being shared.
Yeah, I think it's a very odd situation, because you travel together, you'll get on the same flight on a Wednesday from London to wherever you're going in the world. You get on the same flight back on a Sunday. You know, a lot of the engineers travel at the same time. So it's a bit like that situation they talk about, you know, when the driver puts the visor down, he's not interested on who his friend is in the grid. It's the same with the engineers. When you're in the paddock, you're very focused on what your car is trying to do, how well you're trying to do, getting the most out of your car. You know, you are trying to get the better of another team or another group of engineers, or win the race. But then outside of that, you spend so much time together. It might be in a restaurant, it might be in a pub. Lots of people move teams. So you might spend 3 or 4 years at one team, then move to another team. So naturally you end up with friends in other teams as well. And you'll have a chat in the paddock outside of the sessions and things. So you have to be helpful to other people, because you spend so much time on the road together. And it is quite nice to have this sort of travel and circus family type environment, but you're still trying to win on race day. So it's really interesting dynamic of trying to, you know, when you're out on a Saturday night, you're not the right that often on a Saturday night when we're away, but trying not to say too much without giving the game away, or on a Sunday morning trying not to give away like your start tire, for example, but still have a friendly conversation about it.
I think
you're go on, Blake. Sorry.
No, I think that's really interesting, because you can. There's lots of stuff that you can talk about without spilling the beans, you know, because you can share those threads. Like, what are you guys struggling with this weekend? And there's certain things that aren't too topical. It's like the car balance is just terrible this weekend. You know, we're a bit struggling. It's not like you've exposed yourself. Like, everybody else can see that weakness if it's already manifested itself in your free practice time. So it's like, yeah, you know, and then maybe Sunday after that, you might have a chat like, yeah, that was pretty bad. Or say that another team's driver has taken your driver out. It's not like you're going out on Sunday night and you're upset with the other engineers on the other teams. It's like, that was kind of crap, wasn't it? It's like, yeah, it happens. And that's it. And people look at the internet as the kind of fans and that kind of thing. But it's not like that in the paddock. We like Bernie said, people have changed teams 2 to 3 times probably. You've got mates everywhere, and life is way too short and the season is way too long to not be pleasant with people in the paddock.
Yes,
those are your friends out there.
You're telling me there are no NDAs. Like, we even on last week's episode, I talked to Mike Elliott leaving Mercedes, for example. Like, there's a brain drain here when people like that leave.
Sure.
Yeah, you get it a lot, actually. You know, one of the things that I think people maybe outside don't realise is when a lot of people like that leave, they'll have quite a long, what we call gardening leave, where they're not allowed to go to another team, or they're not allowed to work with another team. And, you know, for the majority of engineers, that's something in the region of 6 months where you're maybe not working on the current car, but not allowed to work on another team's car. And that is part of the trying to not have at least the information in your head as current as it might be if you just move roles immediately like you would somewhere else.
I might get to the Brazilian Grand Prix in the second half of today's episode, guys, but there's a few talking points, even from, like, just to get to with the two of you. I mean, from your own social media, Blake, and this is a point that probably the two of you have crossed as well, is too many races. And, you know, when you are both trying to gather data and prepare for a race in terms of research and that sort of thing, and even digest what information you've got during a race thereafter, I mean, Blake, it must be quite difficult. There's just so much action at the moment.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to, it's always a trade-off, and Bernie can attest to this as well. It's the idea of doing a good job understanding what happened, A, and then B, doing a better job than you did last week, which typically includes developing tools, methodology, if there's a new problem to solve, automating that process as much as possible so that you have the least active, mental power to process that. So that's a huge thing, is honestly like the frequency of these events. And yeah, there's so many paths you can go down. But for engineers, for people like doing what Bernie's doing now, I'm sure doing lots of like presenting work, going out to the races is still also equally tiring because it's nonstop. Even not doing it every single race, I find I'm a bit the days sometimes, but it is what it is. The sport's growing massively, and teams and everything will get to a point where people are stretched a bit, and then they're forced to adapt and come up with new processes that make it sustainable.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Even Bernie, when you're there at a track and you're trying to process everything that's happened, because even on television, it's tough for the TV directors, I'd imagine, at different times to catch everything, because you end up missing some overtakes, and you see it, as an action replay, and then action coming out of the pit lanes. But I guess they can't get to everything immediately, and you're trying to process all this information in real time.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think, I don't know, for example, I guess you're alluding to maybe, I can't remember, it was come out of the pit lane. Alonso came out of the pit lane maybe, and it was quite close to two other cars. It wasn't caught on TV first time round, and it was a bit, but I don't know how much they rotate in terms of the directors doing that sort of situation or doing the clipping and stuff. But these guys have probably been working for 3 weeks on the road. So you are going to naturally miss things unless your procedure is totally bulletproof, which, it never is. It's always about people catching up what they think is important in the race. And there is the teams, some of the teams are definitely trying to make inroads to that. So I know some of the teams are starting to rotate some of their mechanics, definitely. There's a lot of teams talking about rotating some of their engineers, which was really interesting, because I think Verstappen came out this week and said, or I heard in a podcast somewhere saying he thought it was really important not to rotate his engineers because you work so closely together. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see going forward as we add more races, how teams adapt to that. And I think, from the people I've spoke to, one of the biggest problems is how they adapt to that within the resource restriction. So they're obviously limited on the amount of money that they can spend. So they can't just have 2 people for 1 job or 3 people for 2 jobs, whatever it is, within the budget cap. So I think the budget cap's going to have to be adjusted to allow for this sort of well-being of the people, such that that's not the bit that gets squeezed relative to, not producing another front wing or whatever the case may be.
Another thing sorry, go on, Blake.
No, absolutely nail on the head with that. The cost cap is something that has all the right intentions, but I think, lo and behold, as you're adding workload and capacity, certain people are going to start burning out from that, because it is nonstop. The mechanics definitely are huge, but Bernie's point about the engineers, it's a really tricky one, because a lot of drivers, those relationships are super important to have those week in, week out. But now that there's 24-ish races, I think you can build that team up. We'll see that happen, hopefully, in the next couple of years, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of people. It's like, World Endurance Championship, 8 rounds and a little bit of sports car on the side. Great. much more sustainable.
The sprint format is another, I guess, issue that crops up week to week, Blake, as well. We've got Bernie's views on it different times as well, but I might ask you both on this one. Like, the word this week, Formula One is in talks with teams to implement the sprint format for the 2024 season. Talk of the 2 qualifying sessions swapping places. What's your current take on it, Blake? Is it what fans want?
I have to be very careful when I answer that question, because I appreciate that my point of view is not that of the fans. So I have to be very clear that I don't put myself in their position, because I look at everything through not a better lens, just a different lens. So, I have to not put words in people's mouths, but as a spectator at the circuit, I think the sprint is interesting because you have a decisive session every day. So it gives a little bit more value, but at the same time, a lot of the fans at the track are just happy to be seeing the Formula One cars going around, because it's not like the timings or anything else while you're on the track, unless you've got, phone signal and you're watching the timing, or you happen to be sat next to a television. So the more we have it, I personally feel burned out by it, because it's like 2 very similar qualifying sessions. You have a sprint race, which basically shows you what's going to happen in the main event. So I wasn't too surprised to see Mercedes struggling this weekend, because the sprint race was an absolute disaster for them. They were down horrendously. And then, lo and behold, what happened in the race? So it was one of those things. You wouldn't. I don't know if you're going to have filet mignon every night, are you?
Possibly not.
I'm not, because I can't afford it. And probably after that, I wouldn't enjoy it that much after that. So I think it's a balance. My personal preference is too many events, too many sprints. It just really dilutes the product and the excitement for me.
The problem, Bernie, isn't it? I guess it's the lack of the predictability. So when you see Max Verstappen pull away in a sprint race, you know that's probably going to happen at the same circuit, the following day or whatever in the race. And is a reverse grid the option here? Is that a solution?
I really can't get my head around the idea that a reverse grid's going to work. Definitely not based on qualifying, because teams will just start to find ways around that. Maybe based on championship position, potentially, but then you're not going to have the qualifying session in the morning. You're going to be still back to a practice session for one of them. I sort of think that I watch qualifying on Friday when it's sprint weekend, where I maybe wouldn't always watch FP2, for example. So you're definitely getting people into the Friday where they might not otherwise be into the Friday. My opinion, and again, stand alone, not what Blake's saying and not what I think the fans are saying, but if we want to do 24, 25, whatever the events are, we should really consider 2-day weekends. We should really consider one practice session, one qualifying, one race. And that, I think, is a way of doing more weekends, still not giving away the race results, still having a competitive session each day. Yes, you've got one less day at the track, but, I don't know if that's really going to kill anyone. So it's interesting.
Well, to jump in there a little bit, another thing that I think a benefit of the sprint weekend is the jeopardy that it introduces, because you have a lack of preparation. And what you've proposed is you maintain some of that jeopardy by having reduced practice, a more compact weekend, and you still have a thrilling event that is possibly more sustainable. But I guess the only counterpoint to that is if they can't sell tickets for Friday because the F1 event's not there, I mean, money talks, and that's going to hurt people's bottom lines until they see otherwise, which, but that sounds very enticing, especially because I do, like, as an engineer, when the sprint weekend came along, I was like, this can't be a thing. Like, you get one session, but at the end of the day, that tends to reward teams that have a higher hit rate on their tools, like their wind tunnels, CFD, and everything else. They have to have a very good driver in the loop simulator program, because you have to show up at the track in free practice one with very few question marks over your setup, the operating window, and the conditions that you're going to encounter. So is that a meritocracy? I think so. But it also introduces some jeopardy, because there's too much chaos in Formula One. As much as, especially in strategy, the uncertainty band around certain things is very high. And that's what makes it interesting and puts you on the hot seat quite often, doesn't it?
That's the interesting one. Like, Bernie, is that a point as well that Blake has made? Like, even the wind tunnel time, like, presumably, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, like, a lot of the teams with less money, the teams towards the bottom of the grid, would potentially get more time in the wind tunnels at times. And that's maybe why sometimes in the sprint races we see a more condensed field and maybe a surprise podium or a surprise win.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, F1 has adjusted the rules, the technical regulations this year, in order to allow this sort of fallen band of aero time based on championship position. It has a reset during the year. So there are definitely efforts being made in order to allow the teams at the back more wind tunnel time, whatever it might be. Is it enough? We haven't seen the full result of that yet. We've not seen if by next year, a more even grid because of this switch in wind tunnel time. So it's not the direct feedback that you have of, let's say, a balance of performance in other series where you get extra mass or extra ballast for the next weekend. It slows the car down immediately. So there's more to come, I think, and we sort of need to let that play out. Naturally, we had new regulations, 2 years ago. So naturally, the rules are going to, the cars are going to converge towards the end of that rule series. So year on year, before we get to 2026, when we've got the new engines, the cars will converge in performance. That's just natural, because Red Bull development will be limited because the cars are so good anyway, and the others at the back will have so much more to find. So it will converge, and it's just how long it takes that process to happen.
I don't want this to become an episode of things that grind our gears about the sport. No, you're but I'm about to ask another one here, so I'm adding to the situation. But the the corner names as well, Blake. This is more of a fun one, but when you see the list, certainly it comes up in Interlagos every year, but also when we see Las Vegas coming up in a couple of weeks, and I think you pointed it out on Twitter as well, or X or whatever it's called. You know, you have the Bellagio Fountain Corner and or the Straight and whatever else. But Top Golf, for example, is the name of one of these corners, which you rightly pointed out. I mean, it is ridiculous. You'd imagine on commentary it won't exactly be referred to as that. But what is your take on F1 corner names?
I think that's another one of those things. Like, I have to put myself, like, as an engineering point of view, most circuits, it's very concise and clear what corner numbers are. So when you're referring to something in telemetry and data, trying to have a conversation with another engineer or somebody in the pit wall, it needs to be turn 6, turn 9. If it's Monza, everybody knows where Ascari is. If it's Silverstone, everybody knows where Copse, Maggots, and Beckett's are. Fine. But it's like when you start getting to, I don't know any corner names at Circuit of the Americas. I should know, but don't know many of the corner names around places we don't go that often, like Portimao, China, no idea. But I mean, if Crofty's on TV talking about Top Golf turn 17, I'm gonna lose it, man. I'm gonna absolutely lose it.
So this question came from me because an engineering point, we always use corner numbers. Everywhere we use corner numbers, it's really clear. The track map that comes out, some corner numbers. The graphics on the TV at the start of the show are corner numbers. So I don't know the corner names in Brazil. So I'm watching the commentary and I know the numbers, but I don't know the names. And it was just an interesting poll, I thought, to say, you know, what is it? And I was surprised that actually the feedback on my poll, which is, you know, biased and not probably a good representation of everyone out there, was more people wanted numbers than names. So I think it is completely, especially if you're not watching the race week in, week out, you at least know that turn 1, 2, 3 are the start of the lap, turn 15, 16, 17 or towards the end of the lap. So you've got some more idea than the names. So I think it's confusing. Engineers are very, you know, we just want the numbers. We want exact things, and it's easier to say on the radio and everything. So
it's true, yeah. Because some of the other ones I'm looking at here, Top Golf was the one pointed out, of course, by you, Blake. But you've got like turn 1 and 2 is Harbour Island Apartments, which is the least glamorous corner I think I've heard of. I mean, the MSG Sphere is obviously going to be a pretty unique one. But then corner 12 is the Fashion Show Mall, which,
love it.
I mean, straight into Treasure Island and the Mirage and all the rest.
Treasure Island, yar.
So it's interesting, but I think I'm with you. I think the F1 purists will stick to the numbers rather than the names. Guys, we'll take a very short ad break. We're going to be back with some Brazil Interlagos review, look ahead to Las Vegas as well. We have got Blake Hinsey on with us for the first time, and Bernie Collins as well. We'll be back on the F1 pod in episode 17 in just a second.
The F1 pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula One.
Yeah, we go to town on it.
Yes, indeed. You're very welcome back to episode 17 of the F1 pod on Off the Ball. We're live with you on Wednesdays after race weekends in the F1 pod podcast feed and the Off the Ball daily podcast feeds as well, wherever you get your podcast. We've got Bernie Collins, the former head of race strategy for the Aston Martin Formula One team, and Blake Hinsey as well, a former F1 performance engineer who's also co-host of the Engine Braking podcast. Keep your questions and comments coming into us every week as per usual. Guys, it's I guess only right that we look back on Interlagos on the action itself. Max Verstappen leading Lando Norris all the way to claim his 17th victory out of 21 races. Not a bad record this season at the Brazilian Grand Prix. That moves him beyond Alain Prost's career record on 52 wins overall. I guess, Bernie, business as usual up at the front, but all we want to talk about here is Fernando Alonso, isn't it?
yeah, I think, well, you say business as usual. A few outliers in, let's say, Mercedes and Ferrari I thought would do better. But yeah, business as usual in terms of, you know, Max running away with it, strong pace. Norris, I think, was a bit stronger than I maybe expected. I thought he was closer than what I'd maybe thought. But yeah, Alonso and the comeback, if let's call it a comeback, see where we get to for Aston Martin, pretty unexpected. They sort of clearly said a few races ago, or indicated a few races ago, that they were basically in a test session. They're fully in 5th in the championship. Don't think they're going to overtake McLaren, not at risk of falling to 6th, so just need to figure out what's going wrong with the car. And then suddenly this week to be so strong, both drivers be so strong. Now helped, of course, by Q3. The Q3 in the wet conditions were, I was having a look earlier today, I think Piastri and Perez waited a minute into a session that there's clearly going to rain to come out of the garage. Seems a little bit odd. But yeah, they were helped by their position on track, got a good quality lap done, good starting position, and fit to hold on to it. Definitely had the pace. Alonso had a very, very clever race, and did very well to hold on to Perez, who, clearly had a faster car.
The thing, Blake, was that he just kept so calm, Fernando Alonso, didn't he? And it was really a defensive masterclass.
He's another one of those drivers, like you heard Max talking about almost losing it on the track because he was watching the TV with Fernando and Checo battling. But Fernando's one of those drivers, and Bernie probably knows this better than I, a huge CPU. Just the amount of information he's able to process. He was getting very creative with his driving lines in the final corner to maximize keeping distance ahead of Perez, so that once Perez had the DRS on that very, very long DRS straight, that he would have a little bit more in his pocket to play with. And it was phenomenal. I thought it was just like the whole thing. It was 10, 15 laps of when's it going to happen? Is he going to go now? And then, I think Checo probably should have left it until the very last lap to make the move stick. But despite, as Bernie said, Checo clearly, I believe, having more pace in hand, especially on the soft at the end of the race, Checo wasn't sure he could get it done. And so I don't think he left it to the very last lap. He said, I'll take the opportunity when I'm close enough. But that was really good to see. And honestly, I think Stroll would have done potentially slightly better. He did end up on the race restart dropping back a little bit. But honestly, it's like when the car is happy for them, Lance is a lot closer, and he drove a really solid weekend. And like that Q3 lap going out early, the conditions are coming. I'm sure that probably frustrated you to no end, seeing people sat in the garage. It's like, look outside. It's the apocalypse is happening now, But that's the kind of thing that counts. He may not be super consistent at it, but Lance sticking it, but P3 in that qualifying session, you get one chance to make it happen, and made it happen. Fair play.
Yeah, it feels like even in recent weeks, Bernie, on the podcast, we like anytime we bring up Aston Martin or Fernando or Lance, it feels like we're reading out the death notices, because it's all been so depressing, and it's been really, really a hard time from the last few weeks, certainly. Are Aston Martin back?
It seems that way. Now, Vegas is going to be very hard to tell, because it's going to be a very tricky track, and we'll get into that in a minute, I'm sure. But, I think they openly come out and said at one point, we've taken some of the upgrades back off the car, which is very telling, because we were all asking, is it that other people have improved so much and they've just stood still? But it actually seems like, they've gone backwards by whatever they've added to the car is not working with the car as a whole, or they can't get the setup right, whatever the situation is there. They are actively, or have been actively, taking performance off the car. And now they're reverting on that, because they do have these, sort of free test sessions. So it's really interesting, because that is not historically what I would have thought of them as a race team. They're very strong at, most teams are very strong at deciding if a part is good or bad. And most drivers are very good at saying if a part is good or bad. So to have got themselves in that situation, something's, clearly went a bit wrong there.
Yeah. And the other flip side as well on all of this, Blake, is for Checo Perez. Like, are we looking at it from a positive side? It was great to see the embrace between Perez and Alonso after the race, and both all smiles. But for Perez, will it be, okay, he's back, he had a brilliant weekend, or is it a case of, well, he probably should have caught that car because he's in a faster car?
I think you got to put it in context. And the two things to say, going back to Mexico, he was within a tenth of and a half of Max in qualifying in Mexico. Yes, he did get out qualified by Daniel Ricciardo in that AlphaTauri, which was on something else. And we're thinking that weekend, is AlphaTauri back? Mm-hmm. No, not really. It was just one of those outlier circuits. And this weekend we're thinking, is Mercedes done? Is Aston Martin back? All these things, and they're very circumstantial. But to put Perez in context, he was within a tenth and a half of Max in Mexico. It had outstanding qualifying, pretty good qualifying here, and then a great race. And the Aston was hooked up this weekend. Yes, he had the faster car, but to think that, if he's got an interesting race with Alonso, one of the craftiest dudes in the thing in a competitive car, I'm not shaking my head at that. I thought that was a very good drive from both of them. And, I don't think he was on Max's race pace at any point this weekend, but in terms of qualifying and being there as the number two, it wasn't a disappointing weekend for him at all. I would have if I was Checo, I'd have come off that weekend pretty pleased with myself.
Another man, Bernie, pretty pleased with himself after the weekend that we've already mentioned him is Lando Norris. And I'm just looking at his numbers. I mean, he's only 23, of course, so that puts this all in perspective. His 7th podium of the season, 6th second place, 4th runner-up finish in the past 6 races as well. Also taking pole, of course, in the sprint race at the weekend, 2nd to Verstappen. Still looking for that first win, but I mean, he's oh so close. And I guess the numbers, and those numbers, even just to get the fastest lap, which was, I think, a second faster than Max Verstappen as well, quite incredible.
Yeah, I think, and he's got to be feeling really confident in that car. And the thing that he needs now is probably a bit of patience. He needs to not push it too hard for the win. He needs to be getting those seconds, thirds, whatever on the board and building confidence, building strength in the team, developing the car, and the win will come. You can't finish consistently on the podium like he has and not get the win. So I think that it's about not, for example, it would have been easy maybe this week at the restart to go all out and try and get Verstappen and be ahead and, try and hold on to it and throw away the race results. So it is about just getting those consistent results in for a little while. The car will, the car is coming to him. So you just need to, let it wait and it will happen. And the thing about F1, for many years in Aston Martin and a midfield team, it's not about doing an out there strategy to win. It's about always being in that position to pick it up. So any issue that Verstappen has, he needs to be in that P2 position to pick it up and be ready to pick it up.
And that's an interesting point as well, looking at that final stint. I think you pointed this out quite well, is, they were like, why didn't they cover, for example, in the final stint? And that was one of those things, like, don't just react, do the right thing. Because they're like, if there was a safety car, they had it. He had nothing to lose behind. And it was having that awareness from the team's point of view to frame that for him. It's like, stick it out, man, we'll be good. If there's a safety car, we're laughing.
Yeah. That's a fair point. The other the team that, because even before the weekend, I was thinking, well, this could be a pretty decent weekend for Mercedes, and it shows what I know, because you look at the results last season, and you had, what was it, a 1-2 for Russell and Hamilton, but all of a sudden, Blake, I mean, this was disastrous for Mercedes at the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they ended up running one of the biggest rear wings and highest drag setups of the entire grid, which you would expect. People always think, oh, downforce is only good for going faster in high-speed corners, but it's not. If you find 3 kilometers an hour through a low-speed corner, that is more than finding 10 kilometers an hour through that high-speed right-hander at turn 6. And you look at qualifying in the race, you're like, okay, the car's a bit draggy. It's good in the high speed. It's bang average in the low speed. And then in the race, and the sprint race was very telling, and the Grand Prix was very telling, is they had all that drag on their car, and they could do absolutely nothing with it. They were chewing through tires. They couldn't do anything with their stints. And it was just, that was a tough one, because it is like you say. I thought going into this weekend, you know what? Yeah, you'll tend to run a little bit more downforce here this weekend. But Mercedes had to throw the entire kitchen sink at it, and it still was not able to produce any performance. And it wasn't clear that it was imbalanced. They seemed actually lost, genuinely.
Yeah, because it seems, I don't know if it was just, Bernie, them not reacting well to adversity, but you have Hamilton 5th on the grid, takes 3rd from Alonso, then the red flag comes, standing restart, Alonso steams past him, and then, I mean, once he gets past him, I mean, it seems that just went from bad to worse for Hamilton, finishes in 8th overall, but it's just like they couldn't react to what was happening in front of them.
Well, yeah, they couldn't react, and like Blake's alluding to, they just didn't have the pace. The car pace wasn't there, and the drag was too high. And normally, when you put downforce onto a car, you help the tire loading through a corner, so it's not sliding as much in the corner, and that should help, if anything, your tire degradation rather than hurt it. And they just seemed like they just didn't know. And even through the stints, they just weren't knowing. And I think Hamilton came out on his final stint on the soft tire. Everyone has run the soft and medium tires. Hamilton's coming out saying, why didn't we fit the hard? And they just seemed like nobody'd fitted that. I think Goodrich-Steiner earlier on the weekend had said nobody's touching the hard, it's just a travel tire. So for Hamilton to come out and say that in the race, frustrated with the car performance because he knows the degradation is so high, it's just an indication of how lost they appeared to be this weekend. And, is it a Brazil-specific thing? Is it a setup thing? We don't know, but very unusual for them to come out and be so different to where they've been in previous races.
The other thing I think you mentioned as well, Ferrari, Blake, earlier, and like when you look at the constructor standings, like that battle for second it's not over. I mean, Mercedes will lead by 20 points ahead of Ferrari and 3-2 to 3-6-2. You have McLaren then back on 2-8 to Aston Martin 2-6-1. But I mean, it just went wrong so quickly for Ferrari at the weekend. Per Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, we had Leclerc. We had both the Alfa Romeos out with, I believe, those were power unit issues as well. So it was like, that's just not a good look. But to be fair, at the same time, it's not like Ferrari looked super strong. Like Sainz's middle stint on the medium wasn't bad at all. He was hanging on to everybody else, but he couldn't get past Stroll. And that just drug him back. So he had no chance of competing that. And then on the final stint on the soft, the Sainz was very, very weak as well. So again, it's a little bit of a tired anecdote, but the Ferrari, not Mercedes this weekend, bad on tires, but they couldn't make it work at all on the soft, and they had no shot whatsoever. Even if Leclerc was in it, we can never say. Maybe it was an off weekend for Carlos, but that's one of those things that you look at, like a team like Ferrari, like Mercedes, like Red Bull. These are the biggest, best teams with the most resources, the best engineers, and it's really, really troubling to understand where it's gone wrong. Because you have the huge brain capacity, you have the huge resources, you have all the money in the world that you need, that you can spend, and spending several years through this, ground effect floor car formula and unable to challenge for reliability, for performance, for tire management. It's really frustrating, and I would love to see them up there with McLaren, up there with Mercedes, and if Aston Martin can get back to where they were at the start of the season, now that they've found some understanding, hopefully we could have a really, really interesting last 2 years of this regulation set.
And that's the thing as well, like the power unit and the engine as well, Bernie. Like presumably in your team strategy meetings when you worked with Aston Martin, I guess the debrief to a race, some problems were less massive than others. A power unit problem or an engine problem is, it's pretty deep rooted.
Yeah, any reliability issues, I could say it is, if you have to finish first you have to finish, and that is so true. And particularly because it's every little niggle, and Mexico's hard on engines because of the altitude. It's hard on the car because of the altitude. Brazil equally so. Vegas, for a very different reason. Vegas is going to be really cold, so much cooler than we ever run these cars. And actually, to keep the engine and everything hot enough and operating at the optimum temperature is going to be an equal challenge in the other direction. So going into an event like that, a street event where you're running through the practice sessions, is so important, because the drivers need to learn, you need to learn. Every lap will count next weekend or 2 weekends' time. So to be carrying any niggle with you is just a worry. It's just a risk.
That's got us in nicely to the Las Vegas build-up, guys. Before we wrap up, we have to touch on it, because it's hard to know what to expect. We have John Watson on this show regularly as well, and he got a podium in, I think it was the Caesars Palace car park in 1982 for the US Grand Prix. Times have changed somewhat. But I'll ask both of you. But Blake, what are you expecting to see here? Like Bernie's mentioned, that the temperatures will be a little cooler than we would have expected. But what do you hope to see or expect to see?
What I would hope to see is one of the most thrilling races in a beautiful setting that we've seen this season. But I think what will the build up to that will look like is absolute pure chaos. You'll have engines struggling to meet minimum manifold temperatures so they're running properly. You'll possibly have drivability issues as a result of that. The next thing is it's a freshly laid bit of tarmac, which notoriously has zero grip. Couple that with tires operating at 4 degrees, 5 degrees Celsius track temperature. This is going to be you're going to have a lot of people say you need to trust your instincts and let the track come to you, because if you start throwing the baby out with the bathwater with setup and everything else, you're going to end up so lost. So I do believe a lot of teams have a good understanding and feel for that. Super low downforce as well. Lots of long straights, a couple of low speed corners, a couple of kinks that should be probably flat with a reasonable amount of grip everywhere. So you're going to be looking at one of those kind of like Baku conundrums where you'd like to have downforce for the corners, but you've got a 1.8 kilometer flat out, 1.9 kilometer flat out section effectively, which if you're running too much downforce on that, people will lose 3/10 on you through the corners, and then they'll fly past you on the straight, and then you will be unable to overtake them through the twisty bits. So all those things, low downforce, also not great for getting your tires up to temperature. So I predict chaos.
Well, that's what we want to see in some ways, organised chaos. What do you expect to see, Bernie, street circuit? I mean, we're all looking forward to it, at least. As Blake says, at least the backdrop will be nice.
Yeah, sure, the backdrop will be nice. It's a bit weird because, we obviously went to Baku a few years ago. People predicted chaos, street circuit. People predicted lots of safety cars. We sat in every engineering meeting saying, do not crash. This is going to be full safety car chaos. And there wasn't a single safety car. So we just don't know. I think someone said no support events. So there's nothing else to help grip up the track. There's none of the junior series there. It's just F1. Blake's going to check that quickly as I say it, hopefully.
I'm surprised, but yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all, considering the nature of the event.
Yeah, someone said there's no support. So you've got, we look a lot, people maybe don't realise this, we look a lot at support events for how their starting grid has been, what line people have taken through certain corners. You learn a lot from the junior series. And my biggest worry is the tyre temperatures. This is going to be colder than winter testing. We have never operated these tyres on these cars in these conditions. So it is going to be a big unknown for teams. Can they get enough heat in those tyres to get the grip out of them? And then can they hold on to it? So if you get a safety car or a virtual safety car and you have to do a slow lap, the tyres are really going to drop off. So I think you're almost going to be forced to pit in those situations. So it's going to be a steep learning curve for everyone out there. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not on the pit wall, but it's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, 100%. To finish, guys, and this is the beautiful part. The beautiful part of this predictions segment, Blake, is that we ask guests to predict the exact order of the podium, and if you get it right, we clip it up afterwards. We say, look at this person; they're unbelievable at predicting things. And if you get it wrong, we just leave it there and we never talk about it ever again. So it's just basically there's no risk involved here. I'll kick it off. I'm gonna go for a Lando Norris win. I'm just gonna throw it all out there. And Lando Norris in Las Vegas is going to get his first win. It's where crazy things happen. I'm going to go for Lando first. I mean, if I'm saying Lando first, Max is probably not going to finish or crash out or something, but I'll say Max second, and I'll say Alonso third.
Strong.
We'll give it Bernie next, because Bernie probably had a half an inkling this might come up.
So I'm gonna, just to be different to you, I'm actually going to say Piastri. Ooh. And my reason is, one, to be different to you, but also we know McLaren have been strong on tyre temps when there's been any sort of warm-up issues. So I think there's potential that they can get that right here. So I'm going to say Piastri, then I'm going to say Alonso, and then Norris. Verstappen's gone for some reason.
Chaos merchant.
Yeah. Well, you predicted chaos, Blake, so what sort of result are we going to see?
I mean, if we're talking about people that are good at getting their tires up to temperature and maybe too hot, I think Haas would definitely have a good shot at this, because for whatever reason, they tend to qualify well and then absolutely rip through tires during the race. But I don't think they'll be able to put the whole package together. I'm going to go, I think Max will do this one, honestly. But I think that for this type of circuit, I think Leclerc should also go quite well. And then I think Checo will finish off the podium. I'm going pretty safe. The last time I made a prediction, I never make predictions. I hate doing it. I shouldn't have said yes that I would do it. The last time I did it, I predicted the top 5 of a race this season. So,
and you got it right.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Exactly.
You said you hate doing them. You should love it.
No. I save it for special occasions. So I've obliged in this one.
Absolutely, yeah, of course. Well, we appreciate that. And Las Vegas is a special occasion as well. Guys, we'll check in again soon. Thanks a million, Bernie and Blake, for hopping on today.
Thanks
so much.
Brilliant stuff. That is Bernie Collins, the former head of race strategy for the Aston Martin Formula 1 team, and Blake Hinsey, former F1 performance engineer and co-host of the Engine Braking podcast as well. We'll be back with the F1 pod here on Off the Ball in the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed and the F1 pod podcast feed after the Las Vegas Grand Prix to reflect on it all. See you then. Good luck.
The F1 pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula 1.
Yeah, we go to town on it.